Hey guys, Waldock Studios here. Today I figured we would take a break from all the Unreal Engine 5 rhetoric. If you're just tuning into my channel, you'll see that I covered a little bit of the controversy going on around Unreal Engine 5. So today I figured I'd approach this differently and kind of give people a history lesson for those who are just kind of like just now jumping into this whole mess that is modern day rendering techniques versus old school. I'll let this video play in the background. It's called These Two Games Are 9 Years Apart, and I'll just kind of discuss as this is playing. So the fella that does this video, and I'm gonna mute the audio so it's not distracting, doesn't talk through any of this. He just kind of gives a side-by-side comparison of the two generations, and it's a really good place to give you guys a history lesson, or kind of talk about technology as it's moved. But you can see here on the left versus the right, something seems a bit different. And there's been a number of people covering topics like this. The infamous Threat Interactive have gone over a lot of the different rendering techniques in modern tech, UE4 and UE5, and has covered DLSS and different upscaling technologies. And essentially what you have going on here, and if you were to look into the comments of the video, a lot of people are like, it looks like I went from looking at a 1080p native to like a 480p image. And the person that made that comment wouldn't be too far off from the truth, because that's essentially what's going on here. Batman Arkham Knight was made in Unreal Engine 3. And at the time, Unreal Engine had a plethora of anti-aliasing techniques, but the most popular of them was MSAA, or FXAA, on the forward rendering pipeline. Deferred rendering didn't come until later. So Batman Arkham Knight was released on June 23rd, 2015, and it started development sometime in 2011. Unreal Engine 4, however, didn't release until 2014. So that means that they were well into the development cycle on a pretty stable and established engine back during the late 7th gen, early 8th gen console lifespan. And the funny thing is that Rocksteady actually released a deferred rendering UE4 title and then went back to Unreal Engine 3 for their subsequent title. The thing that people don't realize is that this whole anti-aliasing and upscaling argument has pre-existed 9th gen. Like, people were probably not as upset about it back whenever deferred rendering came out, but the TAA, let's just say the people that were anti-TAA, that's existed ever since the birth of deferred rendering, and how it ultimately changed the landscape of what anti-aliasing looked at between forward and deferred rendering passes. Because remember, TAA was available in forward as well. The difference is that you're not deferring your light calculations, and you also didn't have what we now call TAAU, which is a means to sample from a smaller image, 480p, 720p, and then upscale that image, and then clean it up in the post. So not only are you killing off the specular stuff in the image, like if we pause it here and we look at the specular places throughout this native image, right? So in forward rendering, you have basically no upscaler. You're raw pixels per pixel to the screen. That's what you're getting. And you have a way to visualize all of the specular aspects of the scene. It's not being smeared out, it's not being downsampled and then re-upsampled. It is just raw right to your screen. You can see this on Batman's cape. You can see this just through the overall aesthetic and quality that they're delivering to the screen. And the argument can be said, if you go to a modern Unreal Engine TAAU scene, you'll still have some, like specular objects, but TAAU, one, you've down-res the image, and you're either running what they call dynamic res, which is allowing the image to downsample and upsample, and then the U part of that is like stretching it back up to fit a 1080p or a 4K monitor. And then you're basically throwing TAA anti-aliasing on top of that, which just strips the image of all of the little finer details that you would otherwise get out of the old forward rendering pass. You have to tolerate a little bit of jaggies that come with this older rendering pipeline, but with every rendering technique, there are trade-offs. And I tend, my opinion, to favor this older technique that is true to the original vision and the original goal of the scene, and that would run on a potato nowadays. Modern day hardware just eats this game up like it's nothing, versus struggling to do the new techniques that we're doing, which everybody says it looks kind of like an oil painting or smeared mud, or the details get lost, etc., etc. And then you're paying twice as much. Like modern day GPUs weren't really able to pull this game off very well. And on top of that, they're downsampling it, and you didn't really get an improvement over on the overall. Like many people would say, Suicide Squad was just a flop. And let's give you some relative time frames here. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League released in 2024, and it's running a very highly customized version of one of the later UE4 Unreal Engine 4 builds. Forward rendering support, like if we talk about Arkham Knight, they couldn't even have made the jump to UE4. I would argue that late in their dev cycle, it probably would have been a mistake. And keep the same look. Nowadays, you can. I want to reiterate, UE5 can do all of these rendering techniques. I've gone over this in my channel. Check out my other videos. But UE5 can do forward rendering. It was added back in at around 4.14. VR made a huge push to restore forward rendering pass to Unreal Engine 4 so that we could get a cheaper base pass for being able to hit the VR market. It was also something that was necessary for early ES3, like late ES2 support for mobile platforms. It was just they had to make modifications to forward rendering for VR, for instant stereo, and a couple of other things. But as of UE5, all of these methods are still there. You have ultimate freedom to go to forward rendering and use MSAA over deferred with TAAU, or deferred with TSR and DX12 SM6. All of these are still options that are available to you. But along the way, the point here is to show that there's a history lesson. There is the same transitional issues that were occurring between Unreal Engine 3 and Unreal Engine 4 at the time. Studios are having to adjust and go through the same transitional learning curve and adjustments to move from UE4 to UE5. And in some case, because UE5 targets a broader industry, now manufacturing, Hollywood, short film, etc., there's just a lot more to wrap your head around and understand. Where does gaming and real-time rendering stop, and when does 30 frames per second high-end cinematic rendering start? And I figured that it would be really interesting to take a look at this. And as you can see, like, from a developer standpoint, I use all of these texts. I do want to make that known. I use all forms of render of the UE5 rendering pipeline in some way, shape, or form. So I'm not as opinionated on this as some. But if you take a look at some of these comments, people are like, significant downgrade in lighting and weather effects. The crisp sounds. 9-year-old game looks better. 9th gen. I want to say I saw something in here where it was like, I thought I was looking at a 1080p versus 480p image, and that's the sediment here, and that's not coming from me. This is coming from gamers, right? So I think as an industry, and I covered this in one of my previous videos, and the state of the industry. Everybody has their own prerogative. Everybody has their own goals. The engine itself has its own priorities and goals. Different industries have their own priorities and goals. As game developers, we gotta listen to the market and listen to the industry and listen to feedback as we're pushing the boundaries into frame generation and DLSS and SEXX and FSR and all these upscalers. We got to listen to feedback from people who have been here and who have done this. I started working in like UDK and UE3 a long time. I've been working in game engines for a really long time. And sometimes things click and they resonate with gamers. And sometimes the trend is like, let's go, let's do this, let's move in this direction, and people are on board with it. But then sometimes we trip and we fumble the ball. It's just the reality. People don't mind a washed out, and I don't want to speak for all people. I'll say a lot of people don't mind a washed out film grain looking movie. But for some people, games need to be very responsive, and people appreciate the 1-to-1 pixel finer details of specularity and raindrops and gloss and shimmer and what to their eyes appears in even a native 1080p image to be a higher quality standard. They appreciate that. So I don't know what the answer actually is. I know that we're heading into a realm where people are going to split into two different opinions, similar to the TAA MSAA arguments of the mid 2000s. Like, we've been here before. It's just that this time around it's TAAU versus better upscaling and AI generation. Like, it's just the next step in the evolution. The good news is that UE5 can do all of these things. You can go back to forward rendering. You don't have to use upscalers. You can even go with deferred rendering and pick a AA method that isn't TAA, and don't use dynamic resolution. Aim for a native draw to the screen. And you can do all of that in UE5. So I guess that's the good news there. But anyway, hope you liked the content. Remember to hit that like and smash that subscribe button, and put down in the comments what you guys would like to go over next. Toodles.